Good morning, everyone. Yes, once again, I am back to be able to deliver some more upskill information as we have done so regularly on our monthly basis. This time today, what we're going to be focusing on is summer. What does the skin undergo during the summer months? So, yes, in the Northern Hemisphere, we have summer coming. I know back in South Africa, we are entering into quite a nice cold winter. So this is not high on our priority. But of course, it is important going into your summer months that you're able to understand what actually happens to the skin during summer and how Nimue as a brand can actually assist and help the skin during those summer periods when the skin is undergoing a little bit of an assault from the effects of summer. The word summer comes from the Proto-Indo-European root word meaning Sam, and Sam means summer. So it is the months that we can see it's those lovely long days and warm times of the year. We think of holidays, we think of school breaking during this time. And yes, with the nights being so long, I do recall spending some time in Norway. And at 11 o'clock, 11:30, the sun was still out. So it's very difficult to sometimes adjust. And of course, sleeping also needs to be adjusted. But just think of those wonderful barbecue days and lovely walks outside during these summer months. It is also in some countries, they also experience thunder during the summer periods, mostly during the summer. In South Africa, yes, we do have lots of thunder showers, but it's just because of the heat, hot air rising and creating those typical thunderstorm type of days. And interesting fact, in fact, the Eiffel Tower actually grows taller by 17 centimeters during the summer. And why that is because the Eiffel Tower is obviously made up of iron. And of course, during the summer months, this metal expands. And of course, with the expansion, it actually causes the tower to actually grow taller. So that's quite an interesting fact about summer. But I think we are more concerned about what happens to the skin typically during the summer months. So the key concerns during summer, and this is what we are going to be focusing on now in this presentation, is protection from UV radiation. UV is obviously very big during the summer months. And even if your country doesn't experience a lot of UV, a lot of people go on vacation. Your clients may go on vacation to Spain, to beautiful, hot beach territories where definitely there'll be an exposure to UV radiation. So we need to educate our clients against the effects and what they can do against the effects of UV radiation. Sunburn. What can we do during sunburn? What is a sunburn? And what do we need to be aware of? Then, of course, acne breakouts. A lot of clients may experience more breakouts during these summer months. And why is that? Melasma, the dreaded melasma or hyperpigmentation. Again, what can we do to assist the client if they are predisposed to melasma? Then dry skin, inflammation, irritation. Now, before Nimue, I was that client in number 5. During summer, extremely dry skin, irritation and inflammation because of exposure to the hot conditions. So again, what can we do? How can we actually combat against that during the summer? And then prickly heat, or what we also know as heat rash. So that is what we'll be looking today in this presentation. Now, firstly, the UV. We know that within our magnetic radiation scale, there are certain wavelengths, which is between 100 nanometers and 400 nanometers. We can see that on the left-hand side, this is where UV radiation falls. You have the visible spectrum, the visible rays, and in one of my presentations, it was summer, sun, aging, and hyperpigmentation, we spoke about high energy visible light or blue light, and this falls in this visible radiation spectrum. But then also under invisible radiation, on the other side, the right-hand side, we can also see infrared. So particularly what we want to focus on under UV protection is the UV as well as infrared radiation. So this would be quite a bit of a recap for most of you, but it is just important now that we're coming into summer just to really understand the different wavelengths that we would have with UV and then of course infrared. So UVA, A we normally say stands for aging. It's a long wavelength, and yes, it does make up on 95% of total UV radiation. This is the rays that actually reaches not only into the epidermis, but it will go straight into the dermis. And what do we have in the dermis? We have your collagen, we have your elastin. So the UVA rays that is entering into the skin is actually damaging the collagen, the elastin, and that's why we say that it is responsible for photoaging of the skin. It also plays a role in the development of skin cancer because these rays also affect the DNA of cells where there's a mutation and of course an effect within the DNA message carried through the cells. Where there's mutations, there can also be abnormal cells developing, which could then develop into cancerous tumors, skin cancerous tumors. So, of course, we need to be aware of that. UVA also stimulates tanning and pigmentation. UVA is what we find on sunbeds, and we'll look at that a little bit later, but it can also cause your sunburn if exposed excessively. So if you are on a sunbed and you're having a lovely session thinking this is going to prime the skin before a holiday, you are getting prime high dosage of UV rays and can cause sunburn and of course long-term damage to the skin. And of course, UVA will cause ROS and free radicals within the skin, reactive oxidative species, and that then can trigger inflammation in the skin, and inflammation then can directly lead to aging within the skin. So that's a little bit about UVA. Then UVB, those are your rays that we say is responsible for burning, B for burn. It's a shorter wavelength. It mainly penetrates into the epidermis. It's those rays that gives you that redness when you expose the skin to the sun. So a bit of sunburn, inflammation. Yes, it is responsible for the development of non-melanoma skin cancers, which we will look at later, certain non-cancerous lesions within the skin. And UVB can also be responsible for DNA damage. But the interesting thing is, if we completely block UVB from the skin, then our skin is not able to produce vitamin D. So it's kind of a interesting situation where if we overexpose our skin to UV, we'll end up with various problems within the skin. But if we do not provide the skin with enough UVB controlled through a good time of the day, and approximately only 15 minutes a day, then we will not be able to produce the vitamin D within the skin. So in some countries, there'll be people that are suffering more with certain bone disorders, a seasonal affective disorder, SAD, where depression is prevalent, and of course various other skin lesions that can occur because of of a lack of vitamin D within the skin. So vitamin D from your UVB is also essential. Then, of course, what we look at is together, UVA, UVB will cause photo-induced skin aging. It's inevitable. It will happen if a client is going to expose their skin excessively to UVA and UVB rays. DNA damage, definitely, and of course, protein damage. So your collagen, your elastin proteins within the skin will be damaged. And then, of course, UVC. C, we say, is thinking of a cancer. It's your shortest wavelength, but it has high energy when reaching into the atmosphere. And luckily, it is blocked by the ozone layer. Although in some countries like South Africa, Australia, the ozone is at its weakest, although there has been studies to show that it has had some form of, I wouldn't say repair, but in that sense, yes, it is actually blocking off more of UVC than it's used to in the past when the ozone layer, the hole in the ozone layer was at its most worrying, disturbing. So, of course, UVC is the rays that we need to also protect our skin against. Now, infrared, in terms of UV radiation, most of research has been done with UV radiation. But over the past 3 years, infrared has been another wavelength that has been studied. And it has showed that infrared can also cause damage within the skin. And if you look at this little diagram on the right-hand side, we see that in terms of solar energy provided from the atmosphere, or at least from outside, we see that UV radiation makes up for 7% of total solar energy, whereas infrared makes up for 54% of total solar energy. So if you look at the arrow, infrared actually also reaches deeper down into the dermis. So that infrared radiation increases the temperature of the skin. It produces free radicals as these rays are entering into the skin. Because of where it is affecting the skin, collagen, elastin is being affected. So skin aging can be accelerated as well. There'll be a slowing down of cell turnover because not only is the cell nucleus and DNA being affected by it, but also mitochondrial DNA can also be slowed down. So generally, all cell processes can sometimes slow down with the effects of infrared. So there'll be a decrease in cellular turnover. And of course, the skin's natural potential to protect itself against free radicals. So the natural antioxidant potential is actually reduced. And a good, example of infrared is to see people that are working in kitchens, chefs that are constantly in the ovens, glass blowers, again, constantly in those hot ovens, and you look at their forearms and their hands, and it is really aged because of the effects of the heat. So anywhere where there's heat drawing, where we can draw heat from, even standing on a hot ground, that's infrared. The heat coming off my laptop at the moment, that is also infrared. So anywhere where there's a heat source can be seen as infrared. Now, naturally, your skin does have, you can say, a self-protection mechanism to protect itself against heat. And what happens, the skin produces something called heat shock proteins. And these are proteins that actually steps in and creates a sort of a balance within the skin. So cells are not extensively damaged when there is a sudden temperature change. I used to live in Dubai, and our summers went up to 50 degrees Celsius. So imagine that constant exposure to that high temperature. Something within the skin has to be there to protect. So that is your natural self-protection mechanism, your heat shock proteins. But now, when there's an excessive need for the production of heat shock proteins, sometimes the skin is not able to cope with that excessive direct heat, and the proteins within the skin start becoming damaged. That heat shock proteins are not produced as it should be, and what happens? We sit with the problem of cellular aging. So if in excess, that natural self-protection mechanism against high temperatures, against heat, is not as effective, and that then leads to cellular damage. So in a typical case, if we think of aging of the skin, UV, yes, affects the DNA and causes solar skin aging, together with infrared affecting the mitochondria of the cells, and that is also creating solar skin aging. Now, because we are talking about specifically summer months, heat shock, that effects of heat on the skin damaging the proteins, will cause what we know of as thermal skin aging. Yes, cold shock, when we think of winter, can also affect, and we call it thermal skin aging, but particularly now that we are looking at the summer months, we have heat shock creating thermal skin aging of the skin. So where we used to think that aging is just UV radiation, we have to actually completely put that out the window and think of all the other factors that is also causing the aging effects, and especially thinking of those effects heightened during the summer months. Now, what affects the strength of UV? Yes, the ozone. Then, of course, reflection of snow, water, and sand. Just coming back to the ozone. Yes, we said that in some countries there would be more higher temperatures felt, or the strength of UV would actually be higher, particularly Australia, South Africa, New Zealand. Snow. If you go to a snow area and you think, oh no, I won't burn during those snow vacations. If you think of those wonderful goggles that skiers wear, and they take those goggles off, think of that tan that they've actually got during the experiences while they've been skiing on the snow. So because snow reflects UV and it scatters UV, it scatters, where does it scatter? Directly back onto the skin again. Water as well. And interesting, people that do water sports, they are more prone to sunburn, to the effects of the sun. So water skiers, people that will be on boats, again, the water is scattering, reflecting the UV, and where does it scatter to? Onto the skin. And another interesting fact is that about 15% of UV rays that is reflected can come from sea foam. So that's when you're at the water's edge. That is actually where you can get the strength of UV. Sand as well. So lying on that beach, sand reflects as well, and up to 20% it can increase the UV radiation onto the skin. So when we think of lovely vacations, snow, water, sand, that can affect the strength of UV. Altitude. They do say that the higher one goes, the more stronger the UV strength is. And if we think of those again, snowy peaks going up into the altitudes, up to 80% increase in UV strength at those particular lovely destinations. Then it's that misconception about, oh, it's a clear sky today, so I'll put on my sunblock. Oh, it's cloudy today, I don't need to put any sunblock on. And that is the difference between sun protection, but also overall total photo protection. And that is where Nimue is providing the skin with that protection, not only from UVA, UVB, but also from free radical damage. And it's overall protecting the skin, whether you be in clear sky conditions or whether you be in cloudy conditions. And that also comes to season. And again, it's that misconception that when there's no sun, there'll be no UV entering into the skin. We need to apply UV protection, total photo protection year round. So in the summer, definitely that should be high on their list. That is the main product that they should have, but also during the winter months. So seasonal, yes, there would be more UV during the winter, summer months, but equally we need to still protect the skin against the effects of UV during the winter. So a few misconceptions. Applying SPF once a day is enough. If you're going to be on the beach, that is a misconception. We'll have to reapply every 2 to 3 hours. Then people will say, I have a tan, so I don't need to apply SPF. And that is a very big misconception. They would say that the darker the skin is, you don't need to apply SPF. But think of the effects of UV on your melanocytes. Think of inflammation, your Langerhans cells being affected, which can create the skin to become less self-protective against various conditions out there. If it's cloudy, you don't need a sunscreen. That's a big misconception, as we discussed. Any sunscreen will protect against UVA and UVB. Doesn't work that way. It is the correct formulation, the balance that we have with UVA and UVB ingredients, protective ingredients. And remember also with Nimue, we have the SPF boosters, which is then added into the formulation, so we do not need a high level of chemical sunscreens, which can sometimes cause irritation to the skin. So we can still have a high SPF, but because we have the SPF booster, it really kicks into the protection against UVA rays and that chemical protection against the skin. And then another misconception, you can't get sunburnt when you are in water. And I think we've just put that misconception to bed, that yes, even when you are on water, you can get sunburnt. When you are on water, as in on a boat, or if you are swimming, you can get equally sunburnt. Tanning beds will give me a base tan. That's another one that is a misconception. I remember years ago when I was still working in a salon before my education time started, and we had a sunbed in the salon, and clients would be going on these wonderful European holidays to the sun in our winters, and they said, I will go into the sunbed and then I'll have a base tan. Again, think of that UVA radiation from your tanning beds. If you don't feel heat from the sun, you won't get sunburned. Again, we may be so falsely feeling that there is heat needed to get sunburned, but again, sometimes there'll be wind and we come inside and we'll think, wow, where did I get that sunburn from? And again, it is also a misconception. Now, this is an UV indicator or UV index, and this is quite big in US, in South Africa and Australia. They do also talk about this when they do the weather report, Mediterranean countries as well. And in South Africa, we have this because of the UV being so quite strong here, but it will tell you as they go through, okay, this is the temperature for the day, this is where the rainfall is going to be. Then they have an index, you can see in terms of color, they will show as to what the UV index is going to be. So obviously ranging from 0 to 2, then you know it's not much danger from UV exposure, but then going all the way to the purple, which is 11 plus. So that is extreme risk of harm from unprotected sun exposure. So this is quite good to know. One can also have an app on one's phone that can actually notify as to what the UV index is in the country that you are. So it picks up where your location is, and then of course what the UV index is in that destination that you're in. So I think that is also quite a good indicator as to how we need to be protecting our skin against the UV radiation. Now, immediately after UV exposure, if there is excess of exposure, yes, there can be some inflammation. The skin can feel a little bit thicker. Dehydration, definitely, we would see the skin being quite dehydrated. MMPs activated. MMPs are your matrix metalloproteinases. It's those enzymes that actually is particularly triggered by UVA exposure, and they then start causing removal of damaged collagen, elastin, hyaluronic acid within the skin. So these MMPs, if there's a lot of UVA exposure, you'll have more activation of these MMPs. So not only are they going to remove, these enzymes are not only going to remove the dead, damaged collagen, elastin, hyaluronic acid, but it also can remove healthy in collagen, elastin, hyaluronic acid in that process. So of course it can trigger premature aging within the skin. DNA repair is also inhibited and slowed down. The immune system within the skin, that Langerhans cells, are also suppressed. So sometimes the skin can be more prone to infection post-UV exposure. And then what we know of as cell suicide. You see that cells, that peeling on the diagram that you have in front of you, that peeling is actually called cell suicide. Cell apoptosis, where the damaged cells actually die off. They commit suicide. They die off to protect the remaining cells that are there from damage. So of course, it is a natural self-protection within the skin. And we think, okay, peeling, that's okay. My healthy cells are lying underneath, but damage has been done to the skin. Long-term effects of UV exposure, sometimes melanocytes, the action of melanocytes will actually speed up. So hyperpigmentation, definitely that is something that we'll see, but we'll look at that when we discuss melasma a little bit later. Melanosomes will transfer, but it may be transferring too rapidly. So of course, there'll be more melanosomes containing melanin moving upwards through the skin into the upper layers. As we said, Langerhans cells decrease, so the protection within the skin. Elastosis. This diagram that you have here of this, it's a gentleman that is a lorry driver. And this is particularly, it's a US lorry driver. And if you look, the left-hand side of the skin, so of course, left-hand driving in the US, so the left-hand side of the skin has been over years and years of driving, that has been exposed excessively to UV radiation. Glass also reflects and draws it towards the skin. So you can actually see elastosis, but typically we would call this dermateloheliosis on that left-hand side of the skin. Compare it to the right-hand side of his skin, where there's normal aging, but not as severe as the left-hand side. And that is what may happen if one is excessively spending time in our vehicles. Collagen degradation, and then of course your collagen 7 is also reduced. So immediately, again, looking at the tanning process, we all would love to go on holiday and come back and show that tan. And remember, we said in sun aging and hyperpigmentation, when Coco Chanel came back from her vacation on a yacht and she was a little bit darker than what she planned to be, everybody said, wow, how beautiful that tan looks. But that tan is a sign that damage has been done within the skin. So yes, there's UV radiation. It creates excessive oxidative stress within the skin. It actually oxidizes existing melanin. So of course, that tanned look is melanin now experiencing oxidization, and then that is a rapid darkening of the melanin. So again, that is, yes, where we get that wonderful tan from, but if it's like this immediately, what is going to be the long-term effects? The delayed long-term effects. UVA, UVB radiation increases melanogenesis, and that can be visible within the skin by up to 72 hours. So post-exposure to UV, we'd get that tan. But again, it's those keratinocytes that are knowing that there's been some trauma to the skin, some damage to the skin, and the melanogenesis process has kicked in to be able to protect the keratinocyte cells from further damage. So remember, we said when the melanosomes release and it actually forms a little cap over the nucleus, that is how the nucleus is protected from the effects of UV. So it's like it's having its own little umbrella from UV, but it is also protection. So what happens during exposure? This is particularly now sunburn. So UV, tanning and sunburn are actually all linked together because it is all directed from UV radiation. So that redness indicates that there is damage. And I do hope that nobody has had the level of sunburn that this particular person has had when they have been exposed to UV. Now, I know from previous years when I wasn't that careful about the sun, and this is before becoming a beauty therapist, and I remember being outdoors, being exposed to the sun, and then only coming home, and a few hours later, maybe the next day, I would see there's redness. Where did this redness come from? I didn't have redness in the sun. So yes, a typical sunburn will only reach its maximum redness 8 to 12 hours after exposure. So it can be very misleading when we are out in the sun thinking, oh, but my skin is not going red, I'll be fine. But it's when we are home and the skin is now settled and that time period passes by, that's when we actually see the extent of the UV exposure. Then after a while, the skin goes brown. We said within 72 hours, the skin will lose moisture and hydration. The cells actually thicken and produce that melanin, which is typically the tan. Now, if we have really burnt the skin, there'll be the skin peeling, which is in the diagram here. And we said the peeling action is your body's way of getting rid of the damaged cells that are at risk of becoming cancerous. So it's wanting to actually protect the underlying cells against damage. So that is the process in terms of a sunburn. So this is not actually very good at all. You do not want to damage the skin by causing that redness, that erythema. Think of that UVA going into the dermis, damaging collagen, elastin. And then, of course, for cells to actually have that cell apoptosis or cell suicide is also not good, because we really don't know what the extent of that damage could be. Then tanning beds. Tanning beds are actually being classified as carcinogenic. It increases melanoma risks. It creates inducing of photoaging. It damages the cell DNA and it causes damage to the protein. Think of how the skin feels after exposing it to sunbeds. And they actually say that one session of a sunbed is equivalent to 2 weeks of UVA exposure. So that pre-holiday little sunbed exposure can actually already have been the whole vacation's worth of UVA radiation exposure onto the skin. So definitely tanning beds are exactly everything that we spoke about with UVA exposure, but now you also having it concentrated in a very small isolated area, which is on the body. A few facts on skin cancer, because obviously we're speaking about UV, and skin cancer is because of UV radiation particularly. 2 to 3 million non-melanoma skin cancers and 13,200 melanoma skin cancers occur globally each year. 1 in 3 cancers are diagnosed as, and it's seen as a skin cancer. So out of all cancers, 1 in 3 cancers is diagnosed as a skin cancer. The highest rate of malignant melanomas are Australia and New Zealand. And the sun is group 1 carcinogen, and it actually has been classified as the group 1 carcinogen. And these facts may actually be a little bit higher because some countries don't update this too regularly for some reason or other. So this is important to know and to be aware of. And I think with regards skin cancers, as therapists that is seeing their clients either on a monthly basis, or some of us would see clients on a weekly basis, it is important that we recognize anything that is not looking consistent or something that is changing. If it's something that would be, let's say, on the back or areas where the clients are not able to see, the therapist definitely needs to point it out to the client so that they could actually, have it checked professionally. So non-cancerous lesions, particularly actinic keratosis, this is just build-up of skin. This is actually the major one that we would typically see. It's thickening build-up on the skin. And solar comedones, another one that we would see. We would normally find it particularly around the eye area, sometimes on the cheek area, and also solar comedones you sometimes see on the back area. And then another non-cancerous lesion is actinic cheilitis. This is where you'd see like little, almost look like sores, but very different to cold sores, but little sores that you would see on the lip area. And it's just that, people sometimes do not protect the skin effectively around the mouth area. And of course, the sun, can induce this type of lesion. If it is not looked at and it's not protected, it could develop into a cancerous lesion later on. South Africa, a lot of countries are very much into the sport cricket. And if we see the cricket players, they would have, zinc on the nose, but then also on the lip area. And that is just to protect the lips against the damage of UV. Then, of course, your cancerous lesions. These are areas that we need to be on the lookout for with our clients. Basal cell carcinomas, that is typically what it looks like. So it's like red lesions that looks a little bit raised. But then, of course, you have the more, you can say, dangerous one, which is your squamous cell carcinoma. Yeah, it actually buries itself quite deep into the tissues. And here you can see it on the nose where it's typical of developing. You can also see it on the forehead, ear area. And then, of course, sometimes with gentlemen that are bald, you may see it on the head area. So here you have to cut out, obviously professional doctor would have to cut out quite deeply to actually get into and remove the entire cancerous lesion in that area. Then the last one, malignant melanoma. This is the most destructive, but it's also not as commonly seen. It is also the one that can actually spread to lymph nodes. And then, of course, the cancer becomes a totally different form of cancer. So, of course, if you see in a client moles that are changing, we normally call it the A, B, C, D, E of moles. If you see that there's any change in some shape or form, we need to alert the client immediately so that they can actually have it looked at. This is your A, B, C, D, E of moles. The symmetry is that it's equal on both sides. If it is asymmetrical, becoming asymmetrical, it could mean that it is a malignant melanoma. The border, if the border is uneven, again, also versus an even border, then it could be malignant. Color changes. So if it's not only just one color, if it becomes more than two colors, two or more colors. Diameter changing. So of course, if it is suddenly becoming larger, and then of course evolving where it is rapidly changing size, shape, color, or any of the above other traits. So how does that mole evolve? So this is very important, and one can actually look up and even have it on one's phone to look for how to determine changes within moles and whether it could be malignant melanomas. So coming into UV protection, what can we as a brand do to protect against the effects of the sun? Definitely our Sun C range. Not only do we have your Sun C SPF 40 for the face and also tinted option, but we also have SPF 30 and SPF 50 for the body. So this is important because for those people that are outdoors, that are water sports, it's not just the face that's exposed to UV radiation, it is also the body as well. So there are ways that we can protect the body against UV radiation, as well as with the body sprays, it also protects us from infrared radiation. So within our SPF 40, our 30 and our 50, you do also have an antioxidant complex. That is protecting the skin against the free radical damage, that rust that is created within the skin. And it protects the skin against premature aging, specifically caused by UV radiation. Vitamin C is a very much big part of this antioxidant complex, but there's also vitamin E as well, which does help for cellular DNA protection and repair. Then you do have the sun protection complex, your organic and inorganic sunscreens. And then, as we discussed earlier on, that SPF boosters that just boost the protection from the organic sunscreen, but not having the need to be adding more chemical sunscreens into the formulation. And then lastly, within your SPF 30 and SPF 50, you have Artemia selena extract. This is particularly focusing on protection against your heat shock, caused by increase of cell of temperature, and then also against infrared as well as UV radiation. So Artemia selena really improves the skin's resistance to the aging effects of infrared and UV radiation and heat temperatures. So as we see there, it protects against infrared protection, providing infrared protection. Again, just with infrared as well as UVB affects the mitochondria of the cells. Now remember, your mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cells. So if they are damaged, it is going to create ROS and of course cell damage. But with the addition of Artemia selena, there is protection on the mitochondrial DNA, preventing excessive ROS and thereby preventing cell damage and premature aging. So just one other product to highlight besides UVA, your SPF 40, 30, and 50 is also the after sun hydrator. So if the client has exposed the skin to the sun and the skin is feeling quite inflamed and red and irritated, there is a solution from Nimue, which is the after sun hydrator. So it's refreshing, it's soothing, and it is a post-sun treatment gel for the body. And the active ingredients like witch hazel, vitamin C ester, vitamin E is actually going to calm the skin down, cool the skin, cucumber as well. So it soothes the skin after excessive sun exposure. It also, with the vitamin C and E, it has the antioxidant protection against the effects of free radicals that has obviously targeted the skin while the skin has been affected by UV. And it's lovely, cooling and refreshing. So again, just focusing on witch hazel, cooling, astringent action, vitamin C and E, which is an antioxidant, protection against free radicals, and it also calms the skin down following excessive sun exposure. And then you have cucumber and peppermint, which is moisturizing and softening and cooling for the skin. So wonderful product to have as an emergency product, because we want to prevent our skin from getting to the stage of needing that after sun hydrator. Yes, it's great to moisturize the skin post sun exposure, but we don't want it to be there to actually cool and take away inflammation. That step we want to get away from. Now, summer kit. This is our summer promotion, which is coming out this summer. It is an SPF 30 body spray, sun protection, SPF 40 for the face, and a tinted SPF, as well as after sun hydrator, and then a UV ray detector. So it actually can determine the amount of UV, the UV index that is actually entering into the skin. So wonderful promotional kit to be able to recommend to clients this summer. Now, just looking at the sun and acne, it does sometimes happen that acne may get worse during the summer months. We perspire more during the summer. Oil glands are more stimulated. So, of course, the sebaceous gland activity is increased. So more oil is released onto the surface of the skin. And if the skin is typically quite dry and there's a buildup of dead skin, there'll be more chance of sebum getting trapped and forming acne lesions underneath the surface of the skin. So that is sometimes, where people would think, okay, it's summer and my acne will go away. Contrary to that myth, it can actually get worse during the summer months. The sun, as we said, can increase. And of course, we say there's perspiration. So together with bacteria, excess oil, it can actually accelerate the occasion of acne within the skin. Certain drugs can also cause sun sensitivity. Some medical drugs, like antibiotics, also like the contraceptive, they can actually cause the skin to become more photosensitive. And then when it becomes more photosensitive, that actually can trigger off acne within the skin. And of course, some people may just generally be more allergic when they are exposed to the outside elements, especially UV. Years ago, if I excessively exposed my skin to the sun, I would actually get something that didn't look like acne, but it was like little red lumps or hives on the skin, whether it be on the face or typically on the arms, on the upper parts of the legs. And it just is sometimes a reaction of the skin to the sun, and especially where there is a lower resistance within the skin. So if the Langerhans cells have been affected by some effects, they can also be the result of not protecting the skin. So the skin is more susceptible to the effects of UV. And of course, people, when we know that we're going to expose our skin to the sun and we know that they would get acne, what happens is they wash the skin excessively. They'll use harsh scrubs on the skin. And all of that can actually develop a worse case of acne within the skin. So it's incorrect prevention of acne on the skin. So we need to educate the clients correctly as to what to do that is going to be safe, that is going to be protecting the skin against the effects of acne during the summer months. So what products could Nimue recommend? Definitely just in phase 1 and 2, cleansing the skin correctly, conditioning with gauze, so lifting up that buildup of dead skin cell that is perhaps trapping oil underneath the surface of the skin. During the daytime, if one is only acne prone, to use a lighter moisturizer like Moisturizer Light, maybe adult acne, Nimue Day. If one is prone to post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, then perhaps Day Fader. Then Purifier to use as a full topical cream in the evenings. Exfoliating enzyme, definitely to be able to get rid of the dead skin cells. And then, of course, SPF 40 as a must to protect the skin against the effects of UV. And then, of course, we know that 4 to 6 weeks after commencing on phase 1, you would then go on to phase 2, which is either your active lotion or your active gel. So then there's also other products that can be incorporated. There's the corrective serum, there is the adult spot treatment, there is the clarifying mask that can be used as support products to help the client through this during the summer months. Then melasma, the dreaded melasma that would come up during the months of summer. And for us as therapists, it is particularly very distressing where a client has just managed to get their hyperpigmentation under control during the winter months, and then a holiday in the summer months will possibly trigger that all back again, and we're right back at where we started. So melasma is something that typically comes up during summer, and it is as a result of sun exposure, a change in hormones. So let's say the client is on the contraceptive pill, that can also create more development of melasma within the skin. And then certain cosmetics, so fragrances. We want to put perfume on, but then perfume reacting with UV can also create what we call hyperpigmentation, poikiloderma of Kivat, in the neck area particularly, and then also certain colorings within our foundations, which is non-Nimue perhaps, or blushes particularly, that can actually trigger off hyperpigmentation. What typically happens when we do have the development of melasma hyperpigmentation? We know that it's the sign of our skin keratinocyte cells calling for protection. So the melanocyte cells are stimulated into action, and that causes the melanogenesis process, which triggers off more melanin, which is then going to be stimulated. More melanin is stimulated, and of course will then protect the keratinocyte cells. What may happen also as a result of hyperpigmentation is that the UV damages the melanocytes. So what happens is that you have some melanocyte cells that may not be producing melanin, and the existing melanocyte cells would then need to go into overproduction of melanin. And of course, it's that overproduction that is carried through into the skin, which shows on the surface then the discoloration, and then of course the melasma effects. Again, what can we do for the treatment of mild or severe hyperpigmentation? Currently, there is cleansing gel or cleansing milk to cleanse the skin. Definitely, again, conditioner with the 7% of alpha hydroxy acids to have that wipe out effect of the pigmented cells on the surface of the skin. Day fader, night fader, and then of course exfoliating enzyme and SPF 40. And in one presentation that we did, we also learned about the exciting new upgraded fader range. So that will also then provide new technology of ingredients to be able to help against the effects of hyperpigmentation. 4 to 6 weeks later, active lotion, and then of course either active lotion or active gel. For more severe hyperpigmentation, day fader in the daytime and night fader plus can be used in the nighttime. Professional treatments, not only for hyperpigmentation, but as we discussed, your problematic acne conditions, and also for the aging effects of UV. We have 3 classification-specific SRCs that can be used, that will be used with your Neutralizer Plus. So you have SRC for environmentally damaged skin, the SRC for hyperpigmented skin, and the SRC for problematic skin. And that is together with your Neutralizer Plus, it helps to build a barrier, it helps to have an anti-inflammatory effect, and also an antioxidant effect on the skin. So post-treatment, you still will have the barrier that is then being built and the anti-inflammatory, antioxidant protection within the skin. Then, of course, dry skin, inflammation, and irritation that can be typical during the summer months. Dry skin, excessive exposure, the skin can become dry because of the sun, being outdoors. Dry skin can also be going to a different climate, which is maybe where there's not high humidity. Also, dry skin can become about by chlorinated water, pools where we are. And I know I find sometimes when I travel and I'm at a different country, sometimes the water in that country can also be different. So it can lead to the skin becoming more dry. So again, clients that travel, they need to be made aware that their skin can become dry during the summer. Hot showers coming to that water changes. Inflammation within the skin because of not protecting the skin effectively. Inflammation can also then lead to irritation within the skin. That discomfort, that redness within the skin, that is typical. Incorrect products. Sometimes what we use is, we go to a hotel and we use what is there, and sometimes that is not correct and it is not able to actually protect the skin. So it actually affects the pH of the skin, making the skin more dry, inflamed, and irritated. And of course, soaps. You know, we go again on holiday and soaps may be different. And of course, that can also lead to more drying of the skin and more of an irritation to the skin. So what we look at is when the skin is particularly going through inflammation and dryness, and irritation, inflammation, we will treat the skin as an interactive classification. So cleansing gel light, perhaps cleansing milk on the skin. So cleansing milk will then work on hydrating the skin, building on the ceramide, so building up the barrier that is obviously damaged within the skin. Conditioner light, moisturizer light, definitely element barrier for more protection, exfoliating enzymes, and then of course SPF 40. I know with all of these various, the melasma, the acne, the aging, we did forget also pre and post serum, but I think we know that this is a natural product to use in the routine. We know that with an interactive skin, they do not go on to phase 2. If the client is new to Nimue, we would first allow their skin to become adjusted, to calm down within inflammation, irritation, and then of course first move them on to the rest of the products within the core, and then they would go on to phase 2. So just focusing on just some ingredients. I know we've seen this slide many times, but again, for that dry, irritated, inflamed skin, we need to focus on products with ingredients that offers barrier protection, repair, and that specifically is botanical phytoceramides, which is in your element barrier, milk peptides and ceramide 3, your cleansing milk, as well as your Pro Age foundation has ceramide 2, allantoin. Quite a lot of our products has allantoin to calm, to heal the skin. Inca Omega, we would find this in your skin refirmer. Chicory root, we discussed the last time, that is also in the new AI products. Xylitol sugar complex in your multi-night plus. Low molecular weight hyaluronic acid, which is in quite a few of your Nimue products. Phytoprotect in super hydrating serum, your scientifically balanced moisturizing complex in your pre and post serum, and then your isosterol isosterate, which is in TDS. So when they have a professional treatment, they would have the effects and the benefits of your isosterol isosterate, barrier protection, as well as in your pre and post serum. And pre and post, we all know that it is not only a product that can be used before and after professional treatments, it definitely is a product that can be used year-round after conditioning underneath your day and your night preparation, or if they're using a booster underneath your booster. It has barrier protection, really repairs the barrier. It helps to control transepidermal water loss. So especially if the barrier is impaired or compromised, we will lose natural and essential water. So if we seal the barrier and we protect and build on the barrier, we prevent transepidermal water loss. Element Barrier, another product that is also excellent, that really helps to protect the skin against the effects of the environment. Because it has the Artemia salina, it protects against UV rays, infrared, and also, as we discussed earlier, heat shocks, particularly for the summer months. Lastly, prickly heat. Prickly heat, I have experienced it, and it's not very comfortable at all. But basically what prickly heat, what happens during prickly heat is that the sweat glands become blocked. And what happens is you have your sweating, the sweat actually collecting within the sweat glands, and because it's trapped, it actually creates an irritation. And then, of course, what happens, that irritation can lead to that prickly, or at least that red appearance of bumps and lumps underneath the skin. And then also it creates that feeling of a prickly action underneath the surface of the skin, almost like little ants are crawling on the skin. So that is generally what is prickly heat. So how does one prevent prickly heat? Is typically, if one is sort of prone to it, is to avoid the sun exposure, particularly between 9 o'clock and 4 o'clock. So the most sort of the heat areas, times of the day, and also avoid strenuous exercise during the most heated times of the day. Hot showers to avoid that. And also, if one is prone to prickly heat, also wear loose-fitting clothing. Exfoliate also once the prickly heat is passed to actually lift up the dead skin cells within the surface of the skin. So that is all the tips, or at least, the concerns that can happen during summer months particularly, but also to know what can be done to be able to protect the skin, and to also educate the client on what can happen to the skin typically during the summer months, and how one can actually protect the skin with Nimue, where you have key products that can actually really focus on specific conditions that clients may be prone to. But most of all, it is knowing that summer is here. I think for a lot of you, it must be very exciting to know that it's summer, those long days, those warm days, winter's gone, we can dress differently. Well, the rest of us obviously have our cold winter months. But most importantly, just to be aware that summer is where we need to take also very big care of the skin. So thank you very much. I hope that this has given some added information, enlightened you all on the effects of summer, and also to be, be able to educate your clients on what can be done with summer, and that, there is hope at hand. So I really do wish you all a wonderful summer, those of you that are in the summer months. And just remember to protect the skin effectively during summer. And of course, for those of you who are in winter, we need to still remember, because clients will want to go to nice warm countries during summer. So we would still need to educate them on the effects of heat and the summer, the UV rays on the skin. So thank you very much.